Welcome to a 5-part film series produced by the Manitoba Indigenous Tuberculosis History Project. This is Video 3. It contains directions for finding out more about missing patients who were treated at TB care facilities like Ninette Sanatorium, St. Boniface Sanatorium, and Norway House Indian Hospital. Families and communities can do this research. The purpose of the film series is to build strength, capacity, and capability. The Missing Patients Research Guide is an important link in this process. There are a few things to keep in mind when doing hospital-specific research. In Video 1, we heard about important research tips involving changing names, wildcard searches, and transfers of Indian residential school students between hospitals. We also heard about the importance of having some basic information handy. Do you have your checklist? Remember, you can find a copy in Appendix A at the end of the guide. Burial registers are an important thread in this process, so try to have a general time frame of when your loved one may have passed away. When you feel ready, contact the archives and records organizations about these and other valuable records. Keep in mind, things take time, and in some cases, a lot of time. So reach out and start the process of requesting records as early as possible. Also in Video 1, we visited several first-stop sources you should consult when doing hospital-specific research. Depending on the Indian hospital or sanatorium, there are approximately 5 to 10 more options for you to explore. It is beyond the scope of the video series to cover them all, so be sure to refer to the Missing Patients Research Guide. Take note, some of the sources presented for one TB care facility also applies to the others. The archivist interviews in particular can be tied to research across various locations. They are balanced throughout videos 2 and 3, so to make the most of these resources, it's best to watch the entire series. Let's delve into hospital-specific research about the Ninette Sanatorium. It opened on the shores of Pelican Lake in 1909 under the direction of the Sanatorium Board of Manitoba. By at least the 1940s, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous patients received treatment there. The number of First Nations and Inuit patients increased in the 1950s and 60s as other facilities like Brandon Indian Sanatorium and Dinaver Indian Hospital closed or converted into other kinds of facilities, and their tuberculosis patients were transferred to Ninette. Here is an overview of first-stop sources. We went over these in Video 1, and they are described in the Burials Research Guide 2. You could start at the Provincial Archives of Manitoba, located at 200 Vaughan Street in downtown Winnipeg. The Archives building is wheelchair accessible. Look for the ramp near the entrance. They are open to the public Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and closed for lunch from noon to 1. Remember to bring one piece of government-issued photo ID. From the archives, you can make a request to access the records of the Sanatorium Board of Manitoba, though access may be restricted under the Manitoba Personal Health Information Act. You can request that a search be performed in these restricted records, including the SBM Central Tuberculosis Register, to see if there is information about a specific patient. To request these records, fill out and submit a Personal Health Information Act request by downloading the form online. You can find a more thorough review of these sources by flipping to the corresponding section in Part 2 of the Burials Guide. Let's take a closer look at what Library and Archives Canada has to offer. On your research journey, you may connect with local archivists like David Cuthbert, who are trying to support Indigenous families with the process.
My name is David Cuthbert. I'm an archivist with Library and Archives Canada in the Regional Services Office in Winnipeg. Library and Archives Canada is often referred to by its acronym, LAC, and we often refer to ourselves as LAC Winnipeg. We're located at 1700 Inkster Boulevard, which is just a bit farther east than the intersection of Inkster Boulevard and Keewatin Street, and we're open to researchers from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. And there's lots of parking for visitors, including a few handicap spots right outside the front door. The bus routes number 77 and bus route 15s have a stop right outside the front of the building at Inkster and Dunlop. Our building is very accessible. There's no stairs at the front. There's automatic doors at the front entrance. The front entrance is usually locked, but there's a doorbell with an intercom on the wall immediately to your right when you're in the front vestibule. When you do arrive, we'll sign you into the building and issue you a pass. And these basic security requirements should by no means dissuade you from visiting our Library and Archives Canada facility, because we're very happy to support any research that you're undertaking. We have a reading room. We have a public kiosk that you're welcome to use on site. The kiosk has access to Library and Archives Canada's website, but also access to a few databases. In particular, access to sites such as Family Search and Ancestry.ca. Our website is part of the Library and Archives Canada website, and our Winnipeg office has a small presence on the overall website. And our archives, our holdings here in Winnipeg, are integrated with the main collections search database on the website. Library and Archives Canada represents the National Archives of Canada. Our organization's mandate is to preserve and make accessible the documentary heritage of Canada and to serve as the continuing memory of the Government of Canada. The main location of Library and Archives Canada is in Ottawa at 395 Wellington Avenue. There are also service points in Halifax, in Vancouver, and here in Winnipeg. Here at LAC Winnipeg, we have records from over 60 government departments and agencies. In all, our archival holdings amount to over 40,000 containers, or about 12 kilometers of records. Most of those records document government activity in Western Canada. Our traditional catchment is Manitoba and Northwestern Ontario, but we basically have records currently from all across the country. We do have a very substantial collection of records from what you might often hear referred to as RG10 or Record Group 10. Record Group 10 is sort of a shorthand for referring to the group of records that have been produced by the activities of the variously named departments that have managed Indigenous affairs throughout Canada's history. We do have a lot of residential school records, but they're very much focused on the late 1960s and 1970s, which don't always have as thoroughly documented records of students being transferred. The older records certainly can provide that information, because often there'll be a note about when a student was taken out of school to be sent to a sanatorium, and then when the student might have returned. But it very much, again, depends upon the time. We also have a substantial collection of records from what is sometimes referred to as Record Group 29, which are the records gathered from the Department of National Health and Welfare. RG29 contains a wide variety of records, but many of the records we have here might be some of the most useful we have to researching the tuberculosis experience here in Manitoba. We're very happy to help and support people in their research. However, I do want to qualify that the records we have here are relatively patchy in terms of the kind of documentation they provide of the tuberculosis experience in Manitoba. Records relating to tuberculosis are not gathered all in one place. We do have quite a few records relating to X-ray surveys for tuberculosis that went around to various communities, providing tests and recording test results. However, again, those are very much confined by the time and the community in which that testing might have occurred. We have a number of records relating to Indian hospitals, especially Fisher River Hospital and what later became Percy Moore. However, many of those records relate to the hospital's operations, although there can be patient information mixed in with certain files. We do have some general files relating to tuberculosis that contain correspondence between the federal department and the Sanatorium Board of Manitoba, but again, it's not comprehensive. We also have some other records that might be less obvious in terms of researching tuberculosis in Manitoba. For instance, we have some records relating to the distribution of family allowance, and the correspondence in those files often records when children might have left home to be admitted to a sanatorium, or when they were discharged from the sanatorium and returned home. We also have other files that might be useful for researching family members that might have had spent time within an institution or a sanatorium. Some of these might include files relating to cemeteries. The relevance of these files would very much depend upon the location, where you're looking, and the time in which it took place. For instance, we do have some documentation relating to an agreement between the Brandon Sanatorium and Sioux Valley to use the cemetery for deceased patients from the sanatorium. However, that agreement lasted for a relatively short period of time. Documentation that might be relevant to your research can't really be generalized across all departmental files. They very much depend upon what was happening in a particular location at the time and the particular situation. Certain times we have better documentation than other times, and it very much depends on the individual factors involved or the specific details of your research. And that's why we really appreciate it if people can feel comfortable sharing details about their research when they contact us. Oftentimes, if people are willing to share, the more information we have, the more thoroughly we can examine our holdings to see if we do have any records that might be relevant. We do our very best to support people, but at the same time, we're still working within the limitations both of the records that we do have here, and also, of course, we have to work around the constraints of the access to information and privacy legislation. All of our records here at Library and Archives Canada, Winnipeg, are covered by the Access to Information Act and the Privacy Act. Under the Access to Information Act, you have a right to access the records of the Canadian government. However, there are certain forms of information that are restricted under the Act. One of the most common forms of information that we would have to restrict is personal information relating to other individuals. Most records that would be useful for researching the tuberculosis experience would contain the personal information, if they did contain personal information, the personal and health information relating to more than just a single individual. Therefore, it's usually not possible for researchers to visit us and simply browse through files. In some cases, it may involve placing a formal access to information request or a privacy request if it relates to information about yourself. If it's a formal request, it will go to Ottawa. There's a convenient online form that can be found on the Library and Archives Canada website, or you can print out a copy of the form and mail it or fax it to Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa. All the formal requests that are submitted would go through Library and Archives Canada headquarters in Ottawa, and we would be involved in the search for all records that might be relevant to that request, not only here, but also in Ottawa and in Vancouver, where there's another LAC service point. You would then receive digital copies of any records in Library and Archives Canada's collection that is relevant to the request that you placed. As part of the request for that information, you may have to provide proof of death. Of course, this is the very documentation that many researchers are looking for if they have a family member that might have spent time in a sanatorium in Manitoba. We do have some flexibility to provide informal reviews to access our own holdings. For an informal request, which again would only apply to records that are held here in Library and Archives Canada Winnipeg's office. There's no fee. We're happy to help. For a formal request, there's a nominal $5 fee for an access to information request, but there are no fees involved for a privacy request. Please feel free to get in touch with us, and we're happy to work with you to find where that file might be held, direct you to where to place an access to information request if you'd like to access that file, or hopefully see if there might be a digital copy of that file available on a microfilm reel that might be digitized and accessible online already.
Let's look at another way you can do hospital-specific research on Ninette Sanatorium. A group of volunteers erected a monument to patients who died at Ninette and are buried in unmarked graves at the Hillside Cemetery, just outside of Belmont. You can find lists of names on the Manitoba Historical Society website. The RM of Prairie Lakes holds some records for the Hillside Belmont Cemetery, and you can request a search for burial information by contacting the RM office. Some patients from the Ninette Sanatorium were also buried at the Brandon Municipal Cemetery, which is searchable online. There are also a few burials of Ninette patients documented in the Belmont Sacramental Registers, held by the Archives of the Anglican Diocese of Brandon. You can request a search of those records by contacting the administrative archivist. Let's delve into hospital-specific research about the St. Boniface Sanatorium. It was founded in 1936 in a purpose-built building. Unlike the other TB treatment hospitals in the province, the St. Boniface Sanatorium was run by the Grey Nuns of Montreal, rather than the Sanatorium Board of Manitoba. The hospital accepted both Indigenous and non-Indigenous patients. In the historical records, it can sometimes be difficult to differentiate whether a patient was treated at the St. Boniface Sanatorium or at the St. Boniface Hospital. These were two separate institutions, but both facilities were run by the Grey Nuns. If you are looking for records relating to a family member who may have passed away at the St. Boniface Sanatorium, begin with the set of First Stop sources. Then move through this list to help you find more information. Archivists like Julie Reed are genuinely committed to supporting Indigenous families and neighbors with locating and accessing records.
Bonjour, mon nom c'est Julie Reed. Je suis l'archiviste ici au Centre du patrimoine. Nous gérons les archives des francophones du Manitoba et de l'Ouest, ainsi que pour les Métis. Hi, I'm Julie Reed. I'm the archivist here at the Centre du Patrimoine, which is French for Heritage Center. And we have the archives of the Franco-Manitoban and Métis communities here in Manitoba, but also central provinces here in the prairies. It's a complex of Franco-Manitoban organizations, so it's officially called 340 Provencher. There's also the Cultural Center here, the French Theater, and other organization. So we're one of the buildings here attached to the center next door. And there's a front reception area, so they would let you know how to find us within the building. If you park in the parking lot on the east side of the building, it's closest to our more direct door. And again, just follow that green sign with a white tree, and you'll be able to find our door. The reading room is on the main floor, so there is no stairs. There's a ramp outside, but we do have to warn that there's a little unevenness that makes it difficult to go over that. So we're in negotiation to get that fixed. Also, there's no push buttons to automatically open the door, so you may need some help to get a door open. It's accessible by car, walking, or by bus. For walking, well, we're pretty close to downtown, so it takes about 15-20 minutes to walk, here to the Forks, for example. For buses, the 10 Provencher comes right in front, 43 which goes on to Transcona, and 49 and 50, they go more towards the industrial park. Those ones are, they go through more during rush hour. There's obviously the bikes that you can come in. Unfortunately, there's no bike lane on Provencher, but some people take the side routes to get here. We're hoping that will be added sooner than later. And by car, there is free parking. The only time that there may be a problem is once in a while there's big events going on at the Centre Culturel next door, and sometimes the parking lot's completely full. But you can always call ahead to ask us. So we're open from 9 to 4:30, but we are closed for lunch between 1 and 2. Our phone is very busy and you can't leave a message, so you may have to try a few times. Lots of people call in for genealogy service, so for archives, it's probably preferable to contact us by email or leave us a message through our website. Our organization is the St. Boniface Historical Society, or the La Société Historique de Saint-Boniface is the official name. It was founded in 1902. And basically housed itself in different places over the years. For example, at some point it was in the basement of the Cathédrale de Saint-Boniface. Ended up being at the USB, which is the University of St. Boniface, for quite a few years. But then the community got together to actually build the Centre du Patrimoine here, which is the name of the building, which is run by the St. Boniface Historical Society. We have records from religious communities, for example, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, the Sisters of Saint Joseph de Saint Hyacinthe, etc., who worked a lot in different Indian residential schools and missions, Franco-Manitoban schools, Métis schools, Métis communities. So sometimes you might be able to find something in those records, but those are more hit and miss. Those are the ones where you'd probably have to come in person and just flip through pages and pages of documents and then hope that maybe your ancestors mentioned somewhere in their chronicles or their correspondence. You can also just browse in our website. There's lots of general information in there, so you might be able to, for example, find information in our online database. But I do have a little guide that I send people by email, so that way, just to get you started. But if you have a specific information you're looking for, the best way is to contact me directly by phone or email, and then I can do a quick search to see if we have anything to help you out. And if so, then we can decide if it's best for you to come in person to look at photos, for example, or if it's something that I need to do internally and just give you the answer by email, mail, phone, whichever way you prefer. So, for archival requests, it's important to get a hold of us ahead of time. Sometimes your question might be easily resolved with an email, and with an email I can actually give you a link to a contact somewhere else, or to something on our website, or to a transcription, for example, from our database, so that way I can just give you the information directly. For accessing specific documents, you may need an authorization signed by the donor before you can even access the archives. So you may come here and I can't even bring them out to you until I get an authorization signed. So that's another reason to contact us ahead of time. Generally, we get a lot of requests for people trying to find information about their ancestors. Some things can be accessed directly through our database online. If you find photos for a particular community, you might find your ancestors in a photo where the name's not in our database, but they're there. And sometimes you'll find some treasures that way. If it's more documents that you're looking for in terms of, let's say, a proof of a baptism, marriage, or burial record, those types of documents come from the diocese. Like we have mostly copies of Catholic records, which we've collected for a genealogy service. We follow the same dates as vital statistics. So basically, for example, a baptism record is open to the public only if it's at least 100 years old. So for that reason, if you're looking for a document that's more recent than those dates, then I can access our database and I can give you the information about your ancestor, but you're not allowed to just browse through the documents yourself. So the archives are kept in vaults on the second and third floor, so there's no direct access to them. Generally, we have kind of two sections for materials. We have what is available in the reading room, as well as access to public computers. There's a public scanner. We're working on a community booth that will give people access to being able to digitize their own archives. We also have an area where people can listen to audio visual materials that we have in the archives. A lot of these materials are getting older, so we've been working hard on digitizing them, and as we do that, we give the access to them from our websites, so people can actually access them from home. If you're coming in to do your own research, and if you let me know ahead of time, usually I have some openings here and there, but if you'd like us to do the research for you, then that's where there may be a longer waiting time. Because we are pretty short-staffed. We have lots of requests here, and depending on the complexity of your request, it may take longer for those. If you're coming in just to look at our reference library, then there is no fee for that. If you're requesting archives from the vault, we have members for the Historical Society. They have free access. For people that aren't, we do suggest a $5 access fee, or some people become members, but it's not necessary. It's just a suggestion. As for forms, if you're just coming in to look at the reference library, you don't need to fill out anything. But if you're going to do an actual research project and you're going to be accessing the archives, then there is just a general form just with your name, contact information, and just generally why you came here to fill out. Depending on what archives you'd like to access, there may be other forms to fill out, for example, confidentiality agreement, or permission to copy documents. That's all dependent on what documents you're looking for and who donated them to us, because we go by the donor's agreement that we have with them. If you're just coming in to look at a few photos, you can just bring in your cell phone, for example, and take copies. We just ask that you follow the copyright rules. So for photos, for example, if they're stamped by an official photographer, then you have to follow the copyrights. So you can't just copy their photos and then spread it online. We have a page on the website that identifies all the different fees for how to copy things. But if you do it yourself, then it's not as expensive. So.
Let's look at another way you can do hospital-specific research on St. Boniface Sanatorium. The family member or person who you are looking for may have been buried in a Winnipeg municipal cemetery. There are patients buried at both the St. Vital Cemetery and at the Brookside Cemetery. The City of Winnipeg hosts online searchable databases that you can explore. In addition to the Indian hospitals that the Federal Indian Health Services funded through its agreement with the Sanatorium Board of Manitoba, IHS directly administered 3 smaller Indian hospitals that treated First Nations patients, including those with tuberculosis. These 3 hospitals included Fisher River Indian Hospital, Fort Alexander Indian Hospital, and Norway House Indian Hospital. All were located on First Nations. They often had connections with the larger, better-equipped TB Indian hospitals and sanatoriums. In 1943, for example, several Cross Lake residential school students suffering from TB were sent to the Norway House Indian Hospital, and at least 2 passed away at the Brandon Indian Sanatorium. In 1950, Indian Affairs teamed up with the federal and provincial governments to build a winter road between the Saskatchewan and Ontario borders that facilitated the movement of patients from the Norway House Indian Hospital to the larger TB Care Centre at Clearwater Lake. If you are looking for records relating to a family member who may have passed away at the Norway House Indian Hospital, begin with the set of First Stop sources. Then move through this list to help you find more information. Erin Ackland is an archivist at the United Church Archives, and she is committed to helping Indigenous families connect the threads.
My name is Erin Ackland. This is the United Church Archives Prairie to Pine region, and my role is Keeper of the Archives, which was created for me when I came into this role in 2014 by the Indigenous Church. I'm the person you're talking to. There's not a big team here. We can just talk as people and hopefully find a solution and a good way forward. I am available if you make an appointment ahead of time, Monday to Friday, 10 to 5 most days, and some evenings and weekends if that is the only option for you. We're located at 515 Portage Avenue, which is also the University of Winnipeg. So we're not part of the University of Winnipeg, but we do share space with them. So we're located in Centennial Hall on the 5th floor of the library, right next to the elevator. It can be quite a lot of walking to get here. So there's a few different ways that we can manage that. So there is a lot of parking available, and there's also places where you can be dropped off. And there's lots of accessibility ramps into the building off of Ellis and Centennial Hall. There's no stairs to get into sort of our main building. There's sort of 3 different ways that you can get here. One, if mobility is an issue, you can talk to security who are immediately to your left upon entering Centennial Hall. If you're not comfortable talking to security, then you can also talk to me ahead of time, and I can meet you at the entrance of Centennial Hall and bring you up in an elevator that requires a key. If you come in off of Ellis, there's also another elevator that can take you up to the 4th floor of Centennial Hall, and then you have to walk across the building, and then there's another elevator in the library that can get you up to the 5th floor. If you don't need any elevators, then when you come into Centennial Hall, then there's a series of escalators that will bring you up to the 4th floor of Centennial Hall, and then you'll turn around and head into the direction of the library. Once you're in the library, you can either take an elevator or this very inaccessible spiral staircase up to the 5th floor. When you get off the elevator, you need to immediately turn right because we are right there, and it's really easy to miss our door. So it is a bit of a process. The United Church Archives have sort of existed in this spot since 1877. So for a long time, Methodist and Presbyterian ministers were sort of tasked with gathering the records of their ministry. They were housed here at various colleges that preceded the University of Winnipeg. And then in 1978, the United Church Archives were formalized at the University of Winnipeg because the University of Winnipeg started out as United College, and before that, Manitoba and Wesley College. It has the roots with the United Church. So if you'd like to look for information online, there's 2 sources that'll be helpful. One is our website, uccarchiveswinnipeg.ca, which includes information about our location as well as this visual map to try to help you find our location. So if you're interested to see if we have any photos from various communities, then you can search. And while not all of our photos are on there, there's still some. In addition, Manitoba Archival Information Network is a website that has finding aids, so that's descriptions of what archives holds. Maine has descriptions for many different archival repositories in Manitoba, and the United Church of Canada Archives has a link on their page to over 1,000 finding aids. So you can do your own research at home. It's important that people reach out either via email or phone. I only work 21 hours a week. I'm only here about half the time. Sometimes I'm on holidays, sometimes I work from home, sometimes I'm sick. I would say to absolutely reach out at least 1 week ahead of time, but probably a few weeks would be even better, because then there's sort of more room for availability. Sometimes requests take a while to figure out, and if you come with no notice, then you just have to wait while I do that work. And you might not get as thorough an answer as if you give me some notice so I can look and research and figure out how I can best help you. So the more information you can give me in your email, the more help I can give you. So if you can include people's names, the years you're looking for, and the community, then that gives me a good sense if I have the records that you might be interested in. Sometimes people don't know the specific year, and that's in fact why they want the record. So right now, everything is open, and you're welcome to come see and take scans and photographs of the records. But as we reevaluate how to be an ethical and less colonial archive, then some of our policies might change and things might become more closed in order to respect the rights of communities. So a lot of the records we have are community of faith records. So individual churches will create various records, a lot of baptism, marriage, and burial records, a lot of their minutes, so it will record the decisions that they made at the church level, some correspondence, some property records, some United Church Women records, and certainly you can do genealogy work. A lot of people come here for Métis or Indian status because they need to trace their family roots, and we have those records here. We have records relating to dozens of Indigenous communities. There's sort of 17 relatively prominent communities where we have a substantial amount of records. Like maybe we only have a handful of items, but those handful of items can still fill in those gaps. That is primarily First Nations communities. In the north, particularly around, say, the area of Gillam, a lot of the communities around there historically have had United or Methodist or Presbyterian churches, and often still do. We have really large ledger books. Our Norway House registers that we hold here, a lot of them date from 1840 and go all the way up to 1899, for instance, and they're physically very heavy and really massive. And sometimes books are really small and really pretty concise. Some of the books we have are in really good condition. Some are very fragile and have to be very careful when you're handling them because the bindings have all broken. So we have photographs, including a lot from community. So people, like some principals of the schools, of residential schools, took photographs. Some superintendents of home missions, when they visited residential schools as part of their job, also took photographs of the school and of the students, a lot from the 1960s in particular.
Look at all that he's carrying there.
Yeah.
Champion portage of Island Lake.
1922, Dorinda Sturdy, this photographer who would go on to work at Norway Residential School, completed 33 portages in northern Manitoba, and then also drew this very detailed map of her journey between Norway House and Island Lake. And in 1929, Lenore Kirk was a nurse in Norway House Residential School, and she took a lot of really intimate photographs of the community. And so even though both women were part of the colonial system, they still did take photographs that are probably important to the community today. So one pretty exciting project that is happening out of the General Council Archives in Toronto for the United Church of Canada is the creation of these knowledge bundles. So community can request every single residential school record that we have that connects to a school where their children were sent. So if you're in Cross Lake, Manitoba, your community can request, say, all of Brandon Residential School records. So in Toronto, the archivists there bundle every single residential school record for a particular school together, as well as sort of all of these general residential school records onto external drives, and then they will mail them out. And then it's up to the community to decide how they want to share those records. If community would like to see how they can receive a knowledge bundle, then I can connect them with the right person in Toronto to start this process. Registers contain information about people's baptisms, marriage, and death. So baptism records that are 100 years or older are open, anybody can access them. Marriage records that are 80 years or older are open, anybody can access them. And burial records that are 70 years or older are open and anybody can access them. But everything else that's newer is closed unless you're named on the record or you're the next of kin and the person named on the record has died. So those are sort of following the provincial policy vital statistics rules to try to protect people's privacy. We do differ from vital statistics. The burial record and the death record might have different information. So on our burial record, we'll usually have the person's name, their age when they died. So the burial records are useful in that it can help narrow down where somebody's burial location is, but they're not very specific. So if you want to know where your loved one is buried specifically at a cemetery, you'll probably need cemetery records, which we don't have. So for the baptism, marriage, and burial request, there is a form. So I'm happy to email this form. I can mail this form if you don't have access to a computer or a printer. I can fax this form, and I've sometimes just faxed to the band council, and that has worked out. You can also come in person and fill out this form together with me. So we do not have any TB hospital records here in the archives, but we do have burial records, which might be helpful for people who have missing loved ones who went to TB hospitals. We've partnered with the Manitoba Indigenous Tuberculosis History Project. They've selected burial registers that are most likely to contain the burial information of people who have died in TB hospitals. And so they've scanned all of those records and they've created an index. So normally when people come here for a burial request, then they need to know the name of the community, which leads to this very frustrating circle of, well, I don't know the community, which is why I need the record. And I need to know the community to find the record. So what is wonderful about this creation of this index is now I can check the index with the most likely places where people were buried against your information, and that will lead to hopefully connecting families with their loved ones. Our records can be really traumatizing for people, and it can be really hard to do that work. I've heard other researchers who are better informed than me give advice to people who are doing archival research, particularly in church archives, particularly with hard subject matter, to remember to take care of yourself, to come hydrated, to come with a plan, to like meet up with a friend, to bring a friend. And I try to be a good-hearted person, but ultimately I'm a church archivist and I don't have the tools that can necessarily help people through their journey. I really just encourage people to take care of themselves, take care of your mental health, and we'll try to make this as smooth as possible.
That concludes video 3. Videos 4 and 5 focus on narratives of families sharing stories of loved ones who did not return and how that journey continues to evolve. Video 1 is tied to part 1 of the Burials Guide and gives a general overview. It shows how to gather useful details and shares practical research tips, like doing database searches using keywords and techniques for linking information between Indian residential schools and hospitals. Video 2 focused on hospital-specific research on the Dinaver Indian Hospital, the Clearwater Lake Indian Hospital, and the Brandon Indian Sanatorium.